Hi, everyone. I am your host, Dr. Margie Serrato. I combine my expertise as a cultural anthropologist with my background in psychology, as well as myriad philosophies in the personal and professional growth realms. I combine all of these different knowledges with my experiences, my expertise on helping clients and audiences to dismantle cultural beliefs, to unlearn who they are not, their conditioned selves, so that they can embrace who they actually are and embrace themselves whole.
Thanks, Margie. I'm your co-host. My name is Kalyan Gadam Sethi. I have a background in sciences, and I talk about philosophy. I combine, mainly physical, mental, and spiritual mindset, and I help people achieve joy in their lives through fulfillment of their desires.
Make sure to connect with us on social media, follow us, and engage with us. Ask us any questions. We would love to hear your feedback. The topic we are embarking on today is mindset challenges as a leader. What do leaders need to know? And just as like we did last time, we always need to start with defining the terms that we are using. That way we all have a shared understanding of what exactly are we talking about. So when you think about leaders, immediately something comes to mind. You have an image. Generally speaking, if you are in the United States, for example, if this is where you were born and raised, you have a very clear idea of a leader being white, older, male, in a suit, right? It has your image of leadership, of a leader, is usually the things that you've seen in the media, the things that you've seen in the news, the things that you see in movies. It brings up a very vivid image of what a leader is supposed to look like. But leadership is really the process of influencing and motivating others to achieve a common goal, to affect change in some way. It involves usually clear objectives, providing direction, inspiring others, motivating others to work together for a collective purpose. So while we have this idea of what a leader is supposed to quote unquote look like, right? We have to dismantle that. We have to really kind of start thinking about, okay, well, where we understand maybe where these images come from. More importantly, what does that mean for us in terms of how we perceive others who don't look the part, right? So who don't look like the leaders that we're accustomed to seeing, or what we have learned to understand, conceptualize as a leader. What implications does that have? And we can talk on and on about what leadership actually is. So, Kalyan, I'm gonna give it to you. When you think of leadership or a leader, what comes up for you? What is the image?
Margie, I think the topic we are talking is very profound, right? I have looked up Merriam-Webster's dictionary, and it talks about like leading people, right? And there's as simple as that, leading people. It could be a group of people, an organization, and now we're talking about a mindset of a leader. So I want to be very clear of what it means to me on defining a leader and the mindset of a leader, right? So let me start off by saying the act of a leader is inherently of one's own true nature, of how one perceives the environmental conditions. For example, one can have a strong burning desire and also knowledge of what one wants, right? So Napoleon Hill beautifully crafted in his book Think and Grow Rich, he mentioned that if one has that strong burning desire and also the knowledge of what one wants, he or she can absolutely achieve that. So let me add my version of little bit of on that in terms of what a leader is going to look for, right? A leader is going to look for the purpose. So once a leader has inherently finds that purpose, he or she finds a strong connection, which is their version of truth, and then relentlessly move forwards towards the true north to achieve that purpose. So as much as it seems, they seamlessly walk every day towards the purpose until they achieve the purpose. That's the burning desire I think Hill was talking about.
Okay. So when we talk about leading others, one of the things, as I was pondering this question for myself, was this unusual but very common experience that I've had in my life, which is I naturally gravitate to take over situations in which there isn't a leader. Or there is poor leadership. And it's very interesting because it's one of those things that if you are a natural leader and you see that there is a problem, that there's a void in motivating others, in coming up with a common way of accomplishing a goal. There are some of us who just naturally gravitate to, okay, problem solving. There's a lack of leadership. What can I do? Let me step in and help. Let me step in and fix the situation for the common good. And it's oftentimes because of what we perceive leadership to look like. Oftentimes that has come at this price of other people assuming that I want to be the center of attention, which are two different things. What I have struggled with in my life has been being a natural leader, knowing that it's not a conscious choice. It's just an impulse almost, and an instinctive desire to make sure that we're all okay in that situation. So, to your point, environmental context, what is happening around me? Is there a need for a leader? Or do I just need to hold back and maybe somebody else steps up? Right? But none of that, I don't go through that thought process. I simply just kind of unconsciously just like observe and then just fill the need whenever there is one. So in this topic of leadership and mindset, one of the things that I have learned about myself is my mindset is a collective good. My mindset is always in this place of personal growth, but not at the expense of other things that might be happening. And so how can my personal growth and my professional growth, how can that contribute to a collective growth? Now, in those situations, we may be thinking specifically about, maybe in a corporate environment, leadership, or in a political environment, leadership. But leadership can also happen at home. Leadership does happen at home. And so one of those things that I feel like we need to dismantle a bit is the different layers or meanings that we give to leadership, but what is it actually at a very core, simplistic place? It is about effecting change and helping others to create change, right? So when we have children, for example, leading, we don't often think of the fact that we lead by example without even saying a word. And that requires personal growth, right? That requires us being very aware of how our behaviors, with the things that we say, the things that we do, our energy, how that affects those around us in ways that are very unconscious versus I think what a lot of us grew up learning, which was do as I say, not as I do. It creates confusion, right? It creates a place where children then have to figure out for themselves, well, which is it that I'm supposed to do? And when is it okay to do one thing but not the other? And unconsciously, they're still learning from the example, but trying to rationalize logically what you're saying and process that then integrate it into what they're supposed to do. So how do you see, within home life, leadership playing a role?
I think one of the things you touched on is dismantling how we perceive in the world, and you aptly put it right. We see some of the organizational CEOs maybe as leaders, political leaders, but then leadership for me actually, to your point, starts from how we see our mothers, right? Growing up in a family. So, and I've told this to many people, like once, a kid grows up in the family and looks up to his mother, and then and absolutely to his father as well, right, to the parents. Way that home environment for that human being is creating the desires which they want to fulfill in their life. And slowly that becomes a pattern, I call, in their subconscious mind. And therefore they understand that, oh, my mom is the leader, my dad is the leader. I know where to go and get the things done because I look up to them, right? So, in a way, a leader, we are looking up to somebody because they are leading by example. They are showing the righteous path. Again, not every family, not every kid may be privileged to have that, but that's the common understanding across the world, right? Now, I'm going to take an example of Mother Teresa, right? Now, Mother Teresa has profoundly showed love in every human being, and that's what she was finding joy in expressing. Now, one time, actually, she brought a homeless person into the organization, and that person has completely filled with maggots, right? And he said, you know, I lived like an animal throughout my life, and then the last few days, I'm dying like a human being. So you can see that sense of helping others from her point of view, and what she quoted was, she said, "Do not try to find a leader, but just try to help others." You know, we try to look up for where is the leader, the next leader, and we just need to be a leader ourselves and try to help the next person in the line. That's what leadership is about. And I see that, again, I'm adding my version of how I see that is continuously making sure that you lead by the values you are living in. You cultivate the values across yourself, whether it is, you know, a positive messaging to others and to yourself, or cultivating good friendships, or showing the people how to live a life of fulfillment and joy. See, these behaviors ultimately will make you a better person, a better human being, and also a better leader, because people look up to you as an example. You dress up, the way your diet is maintained, the way you talk, the way you behave, the way you stand up for others. So these are the things which matter in a leader. And that's why the cultivation of the mindset of a leader is very crucial in this world.
It reminds me too of the importance in that quote of being the change you want to see in the world, right? Everything that we, on a day-to-day basis, we all have that personal responsibility as well as that conscious choice to be leaders in our own lives, to lead ourselves first and foremost to being better human beings. And in the process of doing that and practicing that outside of ourselves, how we get to affect change in the world and be a force of positive change in the world. And it requires that we have integrity, right? When we think of integrity, actually, I'm going to put that for you to answer. What does integrity mean?
For me, integrity is standing in the truth and also showing up in every situation when your team needs you, when the people need you, and showing up and making sure, you know, your actions are making sure that you understand your actions are affecting a large amount of people and their lives, making an impact, making every action in good faith to the best of the abilities you can, and based on the knowledge you have attained to that point. And I can speak to one of the things we do in the organizations is bigger corporate organizations. We have these values like passion, integrity, innovation. We put those nice words in, but for a common person to be able to connect to that on a daily basis, it's almost those values are high up in the clouds and you're not able to access them. So one has to find within themselves these values so that they can potentially influence others to lead by example. So that's what integrity means to me.
I love that. Two thoughts came up for me. One of them being that all organizations have, applying for a job, the first thing that you can do is go look at their mission and their values, and have an understanding at least ideally, of what is this organization about? What are the things that they try to live, or the things that they at least want to show that is important to them? Seeing this information, it is data basically on a website. What are your values, or what is your mission as a company? Is very different than observing whether those values and that mission is being lived on a day-to-day basis. Is it being lived in by their leaders? Is it being lived in by the kinds of policies that they have? Is it being lived in the way that colleagues treat each other? Is it being lived in the way that leaders treat subordinates? Is it, that you can extend these ideologies, these beliefs about behavior and about what matters from a very objective, discerning perspective. Is this really true? Is this true for this company? Is it ideal? And is it in line with what they're doing on a day-to-day basis? Which to me, that's integrity, right? It's integrating the things that you say are true with how you live. Are you being an example, a true example of what these things mean? Is it a part of who you are in every respect? And if it's not, where is that disconnect? One of the places where I see that very often is in the very hard work of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. We often think that we value diversity, for example, and companies spend a lot of money on workshops and on speakers and on coaches and on experts of different kinds to come and talk about diversity. Now, they receive all this information, but how is this information being practiced? Has this information gone from being superficial, just data, information, knowledge, to at a deeper level, which is change in the individual and change in the organization? That to me is when there is integrity in what's being said in versus what's being done, right?
Yeah, I think we talked about this, meaning that one has to cultivate the behaviors no matter whether you are in your house, right, or whether you are stuck in the traffic light, or whether you're in an airport or in the flight, or with your CEO, or with your person who picks up the trash every day. If you show up that same behavior, that makes things exceedingly easier for you, how you come up and show up to the world, and as much as what you believe in, what you want to take back from the world in terms of what makes you joyful, right? For me, it's that consistency of oneself one can actually put forward every moment. Once somebody wakes up from the bed, generally don't say every day, but I just say that once you wake up from the bed, every moment you start to inculcate those habitual patterns of what your true nature is, what do you want to reflect in the world, and then understand, to your point, there is diversity of thought, there is diversity of people, there is diversity of thought as well, which needs to be appreciated by the leaders. And some of the top leaders, if you want to think about, as an example, Nelson Mandela, right? He lived in a prison for 27 years, with a strong desire in his mind that is looking for appetite for his people, right? And after he came back, of course, he served the nation. But at 27 years, a man struggled in a prison, but yet in his awareness, in his mind, he had the strong burning desire that he needs to work for his people after his freedom. So, and that one example tells the power of a subconscious mind, of how much one can have a desire irrespective of the situations you are, or environmental conditions you are inflicted upon. And another example I was coming across was Edison, right? And Thomas Alva Edison, 10,000 times. Perhaps the 10,000 thing on Harvard article came from Edison himself, because it takes 10,000 times to make a genius, right? And if one can perceive that and understand internally that just by making your subconscious work towards good habits, good behaviors, good leadership, and having that mindset, those and repeat it those many times, you will become that person, right? You're already that person. So again, talking about Edison, 10,000 times he failed, but he made sure to light up the whole world and the world we are seeing in. Just one person made a profound impact in our lives, right? So understanding leadership for me is also that understanding where one person's awareness can go continuously towards their purpose with unwavering focus. That's what for me is also being a true leader.
I like that. One of the, so I was trying to remember the exact quote and I just pulled it up. Thomas Edison specifically said, "I have not failed. I have just found 10,000 ways that won't work."
Yes.
Right? It's a wonderful quote to describe growth mindset, right? If we see things as a failure, it's finite. It's done. It has an ultimate, in terms of your mindset, it has this signal to your brain that says, not only have you failed at the task, you are a failure as a person, right? You end up internalizing failure as a personal fault. Whereas seeing it from the perspective of, it's not a failure. Every single time that it didn't work, I learned something. Every single time that it didn't work, it allowed me to improve one area. It allowed me to go back to the drawing board and think, what have I missed? Where is the gap in the knowledge? What is the next thing I have to try, right? So it's in the process of finding how to make it work. There was so much learning. There's so much learning that had to happen. And there's also, I feel like 10,000 times of surrendering this idea that failure is the end, right? Versus failure is the start of a new path. It's the start of a new journey. It's the start of a new step. And I feel like that's such an important part for a leader to really embrace. And I see this a lot in academia, in corporate environments, in nonprofits, this idea that if something doesn't work, they have failed. And it's really interesting because it even seeps through, STEM fields, the sciences are you cannot have all of this technological and scientific advancement without the help of failure, right? You have to have failure in order to learn what doesn't work. And then you make the next best decision on what are you going to try until it works. And even in the STEM fields, even in engineering firms, you have this very human, very normal and common behavior and mentality of risk avoidance and wanting to avoid the pain and wanting to avoid the perceived judgment of others for that failure. And in doing so, what you're doing is you're closing off yourself, your team, your company to innovation. You cannot have innovation without failure, right? You cannot choose, for example, who is the best person for a job just because you have some magical understanding of people, or you think you know people really well, or you might have a very good understanding of who might be a good for a certain position, for example. But until you are willing to allow the person to do that job, whether you know for sure that they're going to be able to do it or not, until you give yourself permission to fail, you're not going to know. And until you give that person permission to fail too, you're not going to know what they're capable of. And you're going to be limited to this idea about who you think they are and what you think they're capable of versus what they're actually capable of. You cannot develop a person professionally if they're already experts at what they do. There's no growth there.
Yeah, I think we all fall into the trap that life has to be in a perfect way, right? And it has to be something which I already know about. I feel stable in this job. I feel stable in this family. And I think that stability is gonna disrupt ourselves, because why did this happen to me all of a sudden in a relationship, right? What did I do wrong? So I think going back to the leadership aspect of it, the observation makes a great leader, even leader of all time, given that one has to have a sense of understanding. Once you were a child, you were at the 2-year-old maybe 1.5 year old, you're trying to hold that chair, right? The chair or the sofa, and you fell down. You fell down probably 1,000 times before you were able to pick up the child and stand up. So going back and understanding how your life has developed because of those what so-called failures we call, but it's young child does not know what failure means because they are able to take the risk, right? To go and stand up. As you age, we lose that sense of ability to take risks. We will fall into a comfort level. We don't want to give ourselves away. We don't want to be judged by somebody else, right? And that's where it's very important to embrace change and make sure its leadership is about observation of the paths of in a financial cycle, right? Things can go down. You may have a loss of revenue, but then you will catch up again. Understanding that how a business life cycle happens, right? And then meticulously planning risks mitigation. Still, failure may happen, but that's fine. I think the context in a leadership is applying the zoom in and zoom out, what I call Margie. For me, which has worked is zoom in is you focus on the current state, the current room you are in, the current action you have to take with your family, with your colleagues, with your friends. You are involved in that conversation or you're helping others, you take that action. But zoom out is completely different concept where you're looking at the CEO level, right? So it's a difference between an employee and a CEO level. You're going high above the your understanding, your awareness, you're increasing it and seeing that life is finite, time is finite, right? When you realize that in every moment, the zoom in, zoom out concept, you tend to be more relaxed. You tend to come up with better ideas. That's not only for yourself, that's for the whole family, that's for the whole organization. I think that's what can make you a better leader because in the heated moment of arguments or something, people lose that leadership ability and then only think about their ego, right? Their self. But at the same time, if you think about time is finite, we all have a thing which is finite. We just don't know when it's going to end, but it's finite. We know that for sure. Why would I put myself in a different state of mind, right? And it is going to be for the welfare of more than me. So I think those habits continuously repeating in your subconscious and getting the idea of what I call as remembering to remember. It's called remembering to remember that time is finite. You need to have move towards purpose. Make your subconscious very strong. Cultivate good habits. Be a better leader. Influence others to be walk in the path of faith and good. So those are the things which, if we can repeat that, the power can be. It can really relentlessly move one towards purpose.
I like that. It reminds me too of going back to how we started, which is the idea that leadership can be anywhere. We are all leaders. A lot of people think that leadership, some people are natural born leaders. We are all leaders. We all get to make a conscious choice every single day about how we live. That is leadership, right? Making conscious choices about how we're going to move in the world. That is leadership. And doing it in a way that is actually intended to create positive change. So if we extract that and we start back at the home, one of the funny things that came up as a thought while you were talking earlier was thinking about that incongruence between what people say and what they do. So sure, it's easy to relate to it when you think about parents or caregivers or teachers telling you to do one thing but then doing another. But we do this in corporate spaces. We do this everywhere, right? Because we're human and we're not conscious about how our behaviors are perceived or affecting others. So when I go take my daughter to school, my kids, but especially like in my daughter's school, there's different ways in which you can take the kids to school. You can park, you can get in the line, so there's ways of doing this to where it satisfies different, needs for taking the kid to school. But the most important part of all of it is there are safety measures that are in place to keep the kids from running through the parking lot and everybody's supposed to take their turn. If you get there early, awesome. Then you get, to be in the front and you get to leave. But the way that adults don't recognize how much of their behavior their children are seeing is always a source of frustration for me. I'm not going to lie. But it's they come in, they cut in line, they don't go see where the kids are going, and they end up speeding up because they want to leave the parking lot fast. It's like all of the things that they do. It's like if you are the kind of parent, which most of us are, that want our kids to follow directions, that want our kids to follow the rules that are set, that want our kids to be good citizens, right? But yet the example that they're seeing is antithetical to all of that. Why should we expect for them to follow any rules, including our own in the home environment, right? But we, again, it's the do as I say, not as I do. And leaders often do this too within corporate environments. It's not taking into account how others are seeing the example that you're setting. Because to your point, you may be so focused on yourself, on your own fear-based experience, right, as a human being, that you're too focused, you're too zoomed in on it, and you're not seeing the bigger picture of what meaning does this have? What meaning am I creating inadvertently by being in this frame of mind, or by being in this action, or by making this decision, or, on and on and on. And it's so important to be in control of our emotions in particular, right? Not the same as not showing emotion. Those two things are very different, right? But being aware of our emotions, understanding that we are human beings and our emotions will come up in different ways throughout the day because we're human. But in addition to being aware of it, having the tools as well for us to recognize the emotion that is coming up, but also recognizing that as human beings, we are capable of managing ourselves. We are capable of managing how we respond to that emotion, how we are capable also of, by example of being aware and managing our emotion, we are showing others what is possible. And that matters so much in a work environment. It matters so much in the home environment to be that kind of example, to be consistent with the things that we say matter, to have integrity in the values that we promote, to also create a sense of safety and trust and togetherness within that particular situation, right? And it applies as much in the home as it does, outside of the home, which is if you are afraid of your leaders, you're afraid to voice your concerns or your ideas because you cannot count on them being open and growth oriented and listening to feedback or valuing your perspective, right? You're not going to be open to sharing how you feel, what you think, your ideas. So when you feel emotionally unsafe with that person, that affects your productivity, that affects your behavior, right? That affects your sense of self as far as like whether I as a human being feel worthy or feel valued by you or not. It has a lot of ramifications that we often don't consider, but that are really important. How to value people. How do they hear compliments? How do they hear, job well done? Is it through words? Is it through actions? Is it through, because we all have different ways in which we interpret the recognition of others, right? In which we internalize it. And when you are failing to recognize people, that's a problem in itself. But when you're also failing to recognize people in ways that matter to them, it matters, right? And so it's important to recognize who they are as people, recognize what they do, celebrate them, celebrate their wins, but also celebrate your collective wins. And how often do companies do that anymore? That seems like something that is really missing from those spaces, which that positive reinforcement is something as small as celebrating each other on a regular basis, even on a daily basis, right? Have a celebration board or something where you're making an effort to focus on something meaningful that somebody in your organization did, that matters. It matters because it will matter to the person whom you're celebrating or the team whom you're celebrating. And it also matters to the people who are not in that team or who is not that person, because then they see, oh, they actually care. They truly care and they're making an effort, and that matters.
Very well said, Margie. One thing which is funny, I can relate to the same thing, like dropping off kids and people trying to cut the line and walking. For me, if I observed, and I made a point that every time I drop off my kids, I get down the car and I take a look at the clouds and then the birds, while everybody is like feeling tensed to get their kids. I make a point to breathe and then say, oh, my little kid who's 7 and 10, this is the moment, right? I don't know if I will have the another moment like this. Maybe I'll have tomorrow, but maybe 10 years from now, this moment will not be there, right? So appreciation of those moments, living in that moment and just experiencing the atmosphere. It doesn't matter what is happening in the background, the parents are, I know everybody has this time consciousness we have to run with. Maybe there is a meeting, there is something appointment, right? They want to make it on time. And therefore you lose the sense of what is happening in that current state. The other day, one of my child was 3-4 minutes late. I had to go and sign off and say, it's late. I think that I did that, and it created me a sense of more responsibility for myself. And that's, one can find integrity within themselves. I know maybe some parents may not be able to do that. They just have to leave. That's fine. But for me, it shows that, okay, as I continue to develop my character, my integrity, that makes more meaningful to me, and go ahead and do the right thing, what I need to do. And you touched on the organizations like celebrating achievements. I think it's very important that once we find, as a leader, once you find even small wins need to be celebrated. What happens typically is that people wait for a big moment and then they don't look up to the small wins, everyday success, and then that big win may just happen in one day. So I relate to this as every day at 4:30 I try to make it a habit to water the plants and now it's October time, so now October, November is coming up, so I put that the light, so that it's New Jersey, so it's cold weather, I don't want them to die, so I put the light as well. And I think of that, it's a journey with the plant, and you would not see a flower every day, right? You have to plant the water, you put the water in, you see the plant, you see the journey of the plant growing up, and one day it will finally give a flower. The flower only comes one day or it stays for a week, but the journey with the plant, that's what will give you happiness, right? So celebrating small wins, whether the flower comes or not, is not a big deal. That celebration, living in that moment, and finding that discipline within yourself and the connection you have with the nature, with the plant, or whatever. For me, it was more meaningful to find the celebrations within myself.
I love that. And one of the things that it's reminded me of is when we don't make it a practice to celebrate small victories, small wins every day, we get into this habit of only celebrating big wins, which don't happen as often as you just mentioned, but also we end up focusing so much on the things that we didn't accomplish every single day, the things that I didn't do, the things that I didn't get to, the myriad ways in which I failed in some way or another, because that's what runs through our mind. And it's because we haven't made a practice to celebrate the different things that we've done throughout the day. And it's because we've also learned to see that's not a big deal. We're only giving ourselves permission to celebrate things that are perceived as a big deal. And usually those are so few and far between that you can go ages without celebrating anything. It's like your birthday comes once a year. Do you even actually celebrate yourself during your birthday? And so every single day is an opportunity to celebrate who you are, to celebrate how you've grown, to celebrate things that you have done to make yourself better, to make somebody else's life better. Every single day is an opportunity to say, look at this. I had a to-do list of 10 things and I only crossed off one. I crossed off one. That was still good. And it's a habit that we have to cultivate, like so many other habits that we have to change the meaning, and we have to change how we respond to them, and to consciously take those actions and consciously change our beliefs around what is important and what is not, what matters about it and what doesn't. A lot of times we end up also celebrating things that don't really have a lot of meaning in the grand scheme of things because you're so focused on this one thing. And then, it's like that saying, you lose sight of the forest for the trees. You're not seeing like what actually matters about you and about your life, about your work. You're only seeing this from such a small, limited perspective that you're unable to see anything else in that moment. But you have access to being able to see more than that. You just have to make a conscious choice about it and change those patterns.
Yeah, and that's very beautiful, Margie, about the patterns you mentioned. In my life, and some of the books I have read, it is one of the things with the mindset and how famous authors have influenced people through books, is that they have cultivated a strong mindset, and that's where the mindset comes in, where they have every experience, they have every opportunity they have maximized their effort, in terms of making sure it is whatever their work is being done, it is selfless, it is more affecting and impacting more lives on the planet, right? Take an example of Steve Jobs. He had the iPhone, which we are all using now as a gadget. We can't live without that. Our lives are completely tied to that now. That phone we have, and Wright brothers. Again, seeing a bird like the birds they have seen as birds, and they Oliver Wright and Wilbur Wright. So in fact, Oliver Wright was born in Dayton. The fun fact is, I went to University of Dayton. So I was always fascinated by how they came up with the concept of this flight, because they know that as a bicycle, you could also balance something in the air, right? Maybe use a rudder in the bottom and then try to balance the flight, and that has changed how we are as humans, we are able to travel around the world, right? It's just that concept of again going back to the point of unwavering focus and making going towards the purpose. So if you have the knowledge of what you want and have a burning desire, I think one can absolutely achieve and move towards the purpose. It may come or not, it doesn't matter. It's just the actions you're taking towards that purpose what matters now.
Absolutely. So if you had to give one piece of advice to leaders about the importance of their mindset and, like, I guess a takeaway, what would that be?
Margie, I think for me it is understanding that we're all in this together. Right, my life or anybody's life is a collection of thoughts, which we have inherited. I would call maybe from generations of profound work done on this planet. Right, of all the men and women who lived before us, they are the ones who made those impressions in our mind, and those are the thoughts we were having and which we claim to be our identity. So as a leader, if you have a mindset to adapt to change based on the environment and make a profound impact on people's lives, and maybe on that way remove some of their suffering they have, I think that is the greatest joy one can have, and that will definitely make them a better leaders who can walk towards their own purpose.
I love that. I love the idea of surrendering your suffering. As a leader, the importance of understanding, being aware of when suffering is playing a role in your life, in your day-to-day emotions, when you're at work, when you're at home too. Noticing that and then realizing this suffering is optional. The suffering is optional. We think suffering is something that comes from the outside, but we get to choose whether we sit in that suffering or we let it go, right? I feel like a lot of people really have a hard time with that concept, and I get it. I understand why. I used to have a hard time with that concept too. but recognizing that we can give up the suffering in it and simply see the lesson. Hey, what can I learn from this? I want to give up the feeling of suffering. I don't need to have that. But what I might want to hold on to is, what am I learning through this experience of suffering? And how can I reduce that suffering for myself, but also how can I be cognizant of the suffering that I might be inadvertently causing in others as well, right? That's, your responsibility as a leader. Yes, it is first and foremost for yourself, but it is also depending on what kind of leadership role you have. It does actually include the responsibility for others. And I feel like there's so much of that gets lost as people advance into leadership positions. First of all, there are a lot of leaders who are not prepared to become leaders. In academia, one of those things that I notice all the time that it just was mind-boggling to me is you have people who are expert in their fields, who know a lot about their research area, and that's wonderful. But because of that expertise, they are put in positions where they teach. Not everybody's a great teacher. You may be great at your field. You may be great in your expertise. You may be very knowledgeable. But if you do not know how to teach, if you are not well equipped with how to deal with students, if all of those things matter for the kind of impact that you have in others. And we completely overlook that. Most faculty in universities have never, ever had training to be educators. And so there's this assumption that by virtue of you being an expert in a field, that makes you well equipped to be teaching. And that's not the case. You're well equipped certainly to be able, in theory, to impart your knowledge, right, and share your knowledge with others. But that's very different from teaching. You can do that by publishing a book. You can do that by, writing articles. It doesn't necessarily have to be teaching, in particular. The other thing that it also brings up is with knowing that many leaders, probably most leaders, are in leadership positions without actually being trained to be leaders, to lead others, to inspire others for a common goal. What needs to be in place to make that happen as part of the process?
I think it's fundamentally understanding, what is existence of your life is about, right? And finding the truth and finding your deeper connection to yourself. I'll give an example here. Like every day we see men and women, children wake up from their beds, and then we simply walk into our regular routine habits and patterns, right? But then I think it is at certain point one needs to understand that this is a profound journey we have, right, on this planet. And whether you are meditating, whether you're reading Bible, Gita, whatever keeps you in faith in that first morning, inculcating the best habits you have, and then bringing forward your best self for the world. Every opportunity you have, present yourself with the utmost confidence and face the adversity or face anybody in the world with confidence and strength. I think that's what we need from every one of us, because at the end, everybody has the time which is finite. We just don't know when it ends, right? So why not have that confidence within yourself, ignite it every single day, bring that spark of joy, bring that energy from your heart, and then spread it to others, right? That's what we need, and that's what the leadership needs to do, whether they're working in the hospitals, whether they are working in building a road, a construction facility, or anywhere in the world. Even we talk about the military or army, anywhere it's the same strength that a leader can inculcate into his people who follow them. So I think that's, if we can get that in every human being, I think life will be one.
I love that. Well, we have been through a lot of different types of discussions today on leadership and mindset and what leaders need to know, and talking about how we perceive leadership to be versus what it actually is. We have talked about how at the very core of all of us, the leadership that we get at home is the first place where we get any sense of understanding of what leadership can be like, and also what it is like, and how we can be better leaders, right? We talked about too, at the core of leadership is really leading ourselves and creating a movement within ourselves to be better people, to walk in love and in joy, and to share that love and that joy with everyone around us. and knowing that it is possible to do that in every different aspect of our lives. I want to also acknowledge that a lot of times leadership can look very different, and I kind of want to leave the listeners with that inquiry of what have I learned a leader looks like, and following it up with how am I being a leader in my life every day. I feel like those are very important questions to kind of, on the one hand, dismantle what you learn leadership is supposed to look like, or what a leader looks like, what a leader is supposed to do, and then also recognizing that they are leaders in their own lives every single day. That is a choice that they have to walk in that path of being a leader in their lives. So I want to thank you all for joining our bi-weekly podcast. We hope you join us again every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Please reach out with any questions, any comments through our social media networks. Engage with us, follow us. We'd love to hear more from you, both about this podcast episode and also about what your thoughts are on leadership and the kinds of mindset challenges that leaders face, and how we can collectively work together to be better leaders for ourselves and for each other. We look forward to our next episode.